So, welcome to our new episode on this show where we discuss mental issues and REBT predominantly and how it can help you to transform your life for more helpful habits and achieving your goals. And now I'm really excited to welcome on this episode Mick Berry. Mick Berry is a author. He has written one book on REBT as well as he's a drummer. He's a performer. So there are many facets to his personality. And today we want to understand his journey with REBT and how it helped him, and that will be a good. He can be a good role model to aspiring REBTians who are practicing REBT or who want to try REBT. So welcome, Mick.
Hi, thanks. Great to see you, Niraj.
So let me start with first. Tell me more about yourself, Mick. What you do and how you were started.
About REBT
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
How you were
well,
introduced to REBT?
yeah. Well, about 30. Let's see, it was about 1985.
Mm-hmm,
So what is that? That's 37 years ago, I guess.
mm-hmm,
Wow.
mm-hmm,
Um, yeah, I had a very bad problem with depression for
mm-hmm,
years.
mm-hmm,
Very
mm-hmm,
bad problem with depression.
mm-hmm,
And so I wanted to do something about it. And so I just started looking up different forms of therapy.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I found a book called Feeling Good, The New Mood Therapy by David Burns, which introduced me to cognitive therapy. And I found it very helpful. But then I moved to San Francisco and I wanted to find a therapist that was familiar with cognitive therapy. And I found a man who did practice rational emotive behavioral therapy, which I found it's very similar to cognitive therapy in that it works with us learning to think differently so that we feel better. And then I learned by doing REBT that it was actually more thorough because it addressed the specific thought, which is a demand that we make upon ourselves that makes us depressed. Cognitive therapy has about 10 different dysfunctional thoughts to identify. RBT really says they come down to one, and I found that really to be the case. It's a demand. What are we demanding out of ourselves, other people, or the world? And I found that by practicing this, I felt much better and I was able to do things in my life and just enjoy myself much more and be more productive in my life. But it took a while for me to really learn the ropes of it. At one point, I stopped for a little bit because I was seeing the therapist and I got mixed up with a woman that wasn't very good for me. And he was telling me how she wasn't good for me. And so I stopped seeing him and kept seeing the woman. Then after 9 months, I decided, I think he kind of knew what he was talking about. I better start seeing him again. And so I was what Albert Ellis would have called a difficult customer. And so it was not a smooth road for me. I dragged my feet a little bit. But in any case, I started seeing him again and starting applying the principles of rational emotive behavior therapy and just found myself getting better and better. And so I just continued to practice it over the years. And it's kept me from getting depressed. It got me out of being depressed and it's kept me from getting depressed. In the course of doing this for 37 years, I've learned the bigger thoughts that I make myself depressed over, and I learn how to eliminate those thoughts. And it comes down to recognizing that the thoughts are not realistic. If you recognize that something is not realistic, it's pretty much impossible to believe in it. So it was just recognizing these thoughts are not realistic. And one of the thoughts that I had that took a while to uncover was an idea that I must not ever get depressed. Albert Ellis has said that nuttiest thought you can have is that I must not be nutty. I must not be irrational. I have to be rational. That is the craziest thought you can have. Now, people that aren't familiar with REBT might say, well, then where does that leave you? That gives you no hope at all. Well, no, the difference is in wanting to not be nutty, but not demanding not to be nutty. And when I discovered this, I even gave myself a homework assignment to allow myself to be depressed for 2 days and not try to get over being depressed, but just to live with depression as a test that the depression would not, it was something I could stand. What was really making me crazy was telling myself I absolutely must not be depressed. And I have observed through other people that that's such a common thought people have. I'm depressed. Oh no, I can't stand being depressed. And then the depression really begins to spiral out of control. Whereas if you can say, I don't want to be depressed, but if I can accept that right now I am depressed, but I can stand it, it will not kill me, I can live with it for the time being, then it isn't going to get worse. And then I can address what is it that I'm making myself depressed over rather than making myself depressed about being depressed. And I do practice this virtually every day. I try to do an ABC exercise every day. But the thing is, it doesn't take that long. I mean, it takes 10 minutes at the most and 5 minutes or less. I once heard Albert Ellis ask the question because Michael Edelstein, who wrote the book 3-Minute Therapy, was introducing him and was in a lecture Albert Ellis was giving. And somebody asked Albert Ellis, is 3-minute therapy a realistic idea? And Albert Ellis says, it doesn't even have to take that long. When you get really good at REBT, it doesn't take that long. Now, throughout the day, I am mindful of my thinking so that if I'm driving my car and somebody runs a red light, and if I hadn't been paying attention, they would have hit me, I could have a tendency to be infuriated at that person, but then I'll catch myself and say, it doesn't help me to be infuriated at them. And people are going to do what they want to do. They're not going to do what I want them to do. They're going to do what they want to do. And I don't have control over other people. Therefore, I had best remember that and be in the habit of when a light turns green, make sure nobody else is running their red light, because they have the freedom to choose to do that. And just because I demand them not to, if that's what I'm doing, that doesn't mean they won't. I want them not to, but still, if I remember they have that possibility does exist, I'm more prone to, when my light turns green, making sure it's okay and then driving. Do you have red lights and green lights in India? I don't know.
Yeah, we do have. Very good,
Okay.
Mick, very good. That's a very interesting introduction. Now, many times I see people who are severely depressed. They don't seem to have any hope that they will change. So, in this context, I will like to know your experience that when you were depressed, in the midst of severe depression, you said that made you introduce yourself to REBT. Before, when you were depressed, actually, what you were doing? How can you give silent features of your state of depression?
You mean, can I describe how depressed I was?
Yeah.
Oh, it was severe, severe, to the point where I didn't think I could be happy. I didn't think I was capable of having any happiness, and I didn't think it was possible for me to be anything but depressed. And I didn't have much hope.
Mm-hmm.
But I found through REBT
Mm-hmm.
ways to lessen the depression, which of course gave me hope,
Mm-hmm.
and learned to lessen the depression consistently and have a handle on the thoughts that I would create that would make me depressed.
Yeah. So can you just share some of the symptoms so that people will really understand that how REBT can help transform an individual? So can
Yeah,
you
I
tell us the?
believe me,
Mhm,
I was severely depressed. I
mhm,
mean, really, really depressed to where I wouldn't want to get out of bed. I was able to at least work and get the money that I needed to pay the rent and to eat. So it never got beyond that. But I was extremely unhappy
mhm,
to where I didn't think I could possibly be happy.
mhm,
It was severe. And I've talked to some people who said, oh, well, if you got out of being depressed, you couldn't have been that depressed. I disagree. I
mhm,
was about as depressed as I think anybody could be.
mhm,
I can't imagine being more depressed than I was. And I've talked to people and I see them having the same thoughts that I did. Specifically, I can't stand being depressed.
Yeah, but
That is
just
a
one
thought.
intervention, Mick. Behaviorally, can you explain what were the behavioral aspects, like in terms of suicidal tendencies? Did you attempt a suicide or something of that sort?
Yeah, well, okay, so any behavioral
Yeah,
things that I did,
yeah, yeah.
my therapist gave me a really great exercise. I was depressed. At this point, the depression was lessening, and I was
No, no, no. So
enjoying
I think
myself.
I'm asking a different question. Sorry to interrupt you again. I am saying behaviorally, what were the manifestations of when you were severely depressed? Did,
Oh, what were the behavioral manifestations of it? Oh, well, it wasn't much fun to be around.
mm-hmm,
I didn't smile much.
mm-hmm,
I was just dragging myself to every activity
mm-hmm,
and just going through the motions in order to do the minimal amount to get the work done.
mm-hmm.
But everybody I was in contact with knew that I was extremely unhappy. So it was just, I would say, to be very just not enjoying anything
Okay.
and not doing a lot.
Any episodes of suicidal manifestations?
No, I did have suicidal thoughts, but those didn't amount to anything
Mm-hmm.
in particular because I knew that they were something I had to watch out for. So I did what I could do so that nothing ever, and there was no behavior along those lines, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now here is one small question. When you said that you were depressed as much as anybody could have been depressed. One aspect of depression, severe depression, is suicide attempts or maybe suicide ideation and then acting on it. But in your case, you did not do that. So can we?
Oh
How?
no, oh
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
So maybe I wasn't as depressed as some people,
Hmm,
but it was pretty severe depression. I
hmm,
just knew that acting on a suicidal thought was an extremely bad thing to do.
hmm.
So I would do everything I could to eliminate those thoughts, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Great, great. So that thank you for sharing your personal information because that will be really helpful to the viewers who think that depression we cannot get rid of our depression, or
Yeah.
for therapists who think that patients can or client cannot get rid of their depression. You were saying something.
Now, I wanted to mention an exercise that my therapist gave me.
Yeah.
What because at this point in time, the depression was going away and I was doing okay. But then there was a woman I was dating who just told me she wasn't interested in continuing to date me. And I got very depressed over that. So my therapist said, so tell you what, I'm going to give you an exercise. I want you to pick something to go do and predict before you do it how much you think you'll enjoy it. Because I
Mm,
told him I'm not enjoying anything. He said, okay, pick something to go do that you might enjoy. predict on a scale of 1 to 10 how much you think you'll enjoy it, go do it, and then record how much you actually enjoyed it. So I thought, okay, I'll go bowling. You have bowling in India?
Yeah, we do have.
Okay. So I went bowling, and I predicted, I think, a 3, I don't know. And I bowled, and I bowled 2 games. I thought, well, it was about a 5. Okay, he made his point. So the point is, I see what he's getting at. Go ahead and do something because you might enjoy it more than you think you will. Well, then I went to turn the 2 games in, and the person at the counter, back then it wasn't computers, the person at the counter said, do you want your free game? I said, what? And she said, yeah, if you bowl 2 free games, or you bowl 2 games, you get 1 for free. I thought, okay, whatever, sure. Well, I ended up bowling the highest score of my life on the 3rd game. I got a 222, which is really high, and it's the highest I've ever bowled since. So then I had to reassess and say, okay, well, that was off the charts. I enjoyed that about a 10 plus. So I went back to the therapist. I said, well, your experiment worked. And at first it worked because I predicted a 3 and then it was a 5, but then I got a free game out of it and I ended up having a 10 plus. So you made your point that I could enjoy myself a lot more than I think I could. He said, yeah, that's it. I said, but had it been a 5, your point would have still been made. He said, sure, it would have. I said, well, do you ever give this exercise to anybody and they predict a 2 and they come back and it's a 0? He said, oh, yeah, that happens. I said, well, what do you do in those cases? He said, oh, that's very easy. That's very easy to convince people that they can enjoy themselves. I said, what? How? He said, because they always will say, I predicted I would enjoy it a 2 out of 10. And look, I enjoyed it a 0 out of 10. That proves I can't be happy. And I always tell them, oh, are you happy to tell me that?
Yeah. Interesting. So I think Mick, the technique which you explained, it's a classic CBT technique. I think which is introduced by Dr. Aaron Beck. It's called mastery and pleasure principle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 Uh-huh.
Yeah. So great. Now I want to ask you something about your depression. That when you were in the midst of depression, before practicing or trying out REBT, did you try any other type of therapy?
Well, I meditated for 14 years.
Oh,
I practiced the type of meditation.
Mhm.
I probably shouldn't say the type of meditation because I don't want us to have, we probably wouldn't get sued, but I don't want us to have any chance of getting sued, so I won't mention the type.
Mm.
And, this meditation promised spiritual enlightenment and relief from all suffering and
Mhm.
separated from, as they put it, the 3 gunas. Have you heard of that? It was Indian terminology. It was an Indian type of meditation,
I could
and
make
it
out
was
which
all about,
meditation you are talking about, but I will also not mention.
yeah. And so it was all about attaining oneness with the underlying pervading field of absolute being. And I did it for 14 years. And they looked down on any type of therapy. And I thought, well, let me start looking into therapy here because I'm not getting happier about meditating. I did it for 14 years.
Yeah. So
I
did
mean,
it did you try this when you were as a solution to your depression?
well, I just knew that I was mixed up and really unhappy, and I
Mhm.
had a lot of anxiety in addition to the depression. And so I thought by meditating, I was going to reach a state of eternal peace. Okay.
Nirvana.
Nirvana. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Nirvana,
Yeah.
however we want to pronounce it. Right.
Yeah.
And so I pursued that, but nothing, I didn't learn anything in terms of how. And in fact, when I started cognitive therapy, I was surprised because this type of meditation said that our thoughts are not as refined and subtle as our feelings, and it's our feelings that give rise to our thoughts. Well, then when I started cognitive therapy, I started experiencing, wait a minute, my thinking is creating my feelings. This is the opposite way. And I started realizing thinking is subtler than feelings. Feelings are actually cruder. They're a much
That's
less
right.
refined state of my mind. Thinking creates the feelings. The feelings are a product of thinking, and they are a cruder, more grotesque manifestation of my thoughts, which was a complete flip, a complete turnaround from what I'd been told with the meditating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first therapy you were introduced, a typical psychotherapy, was REBT and CBT.
Yeah. Cognitive therapy was the first therapy
Yeah,
that I
yeah,
was
yeah,
introduced to.
yeah. So I heard you said something about CBT, that CBT was not accurate in pinpointing the real problem as REBT was. So can you tell more
Right.
about it?
Well, it, cognitive therapy taught me that I could recognize the dysfunctional thoughts, such as one of them is, and you get a name for each activity you're doing. One of them can be mind reading. Oh, that person doesn't like me. Well, I'm mind reading. I don't know if they like me or not. But REBT would say, well, suppose they don't like you. Why is that something that would be so terrible that you can't live with? Now, it's to our benefit to have people like us. But even if it means that, let's say, my boss doesn't like me and I lose my job over it, that's a very bad occurrence. But there are no guarantees against that. And by trying to have a guarantee of getting this person to like me, I actually make it harder for me to do things so that they will like me, because I'm going to be so absorbed with, I need them to like me. I won't be able to think on my feet and do things in order to solve problems that are going to come up. I'll be thinking about myself rather than thinking about the problems to solve. So
Yeah.
that's one way that I found REBT superior to CBT.
Yeah. So that very good, very good. So that's a brilliant explanation. Now, as you practiced REBT for so long and it helped you very much, did it also help you in terms of your professional life, in terms of being more efficient in what you do? And can you tell more
Um,
about it?
yeah, well, as a musician, I also act and do stand up comedy. You want to succeed, and succeeding on stage and having people laugh or having people like the music is the goal. But if I demand that to happen, I'm not going to be able to attend to what I need to do in order to take care of the things so that I have a better performance. If I'm able to say, well, I don't have complete control here and I don't need to have complete control, I'm able to relax more and concentrate on the task to do a better job. Yeah.
Yeah, so it did help you in your professional life also.
Oh, yeah, a great deal.
Yeah,
A
yeah,
great deal.
yeah.
Sure.
So now, as you have a very long stint with REBT, if I have to ask you that what are the unique aspects of REBT that you really liked and that really helped you create a major impact in your life?
Okay. Well, some of the first thing that comes to mind is how understandable it is. It's very simple, and also how effective it is, because I can use it throughout the day. It's just find the demand and get rid of the demand. That's what it all comes down to. And I know if I'm feeling, now it's not like I never have any inkling of anxiety or never inkling of any anger towards anybody or anything. That does happen. But when it happens, I'm able to say, well, what's the demand I'm making here? And there's always a demand. I mentioned the traffic situation. But so to key in on the question, it's very easy to understand, and it's very easy to practice, and it's very easy to get very good at, so that you can do it throughout the day. The thing is, we're always thinking anyway, and being able to recognize what are the self-helping thoughts and what are the self-defeating thoughts. And the self-defeating thoughts are things that a must, a have to, anything that is a demand. And the self-helping thoughts This is one of the things I like about REBT a great deal, is REBT says retain your desires. REBT does not say get rid of your desires. That's something that a lot of things that would call themselves spiritual practices advocate. Get rid of your earthly desires. REBT says keep your desires. They're what makes life fun. Go for things, want things, do things to try to get something, but don't turn it into a demand. And I get to live my life and have fun and try things and get to have lots of things that I would like to have, many of which do not work out. But if I give up the demand that I have to have them, and I'm still a single man, and I approach women and I often get turned down by women, but if I don't say I have to have them accept me, then it doesn't matter if they turn me down in terms of my not having any anxiety over it. It would matter insofar as, well, that's disappointing. Oh, well, what a pain in the neck. Sometimes it's a big pain in the neck. But a big pain in the neck is not the same as thinking that I can't stand a situation. Another thing I like about REBT is it encourages people to put themselves in the situations that can cause anxiety, in which they tend to cause themselves anxiety over, provided that the situation could be beneficial if it works out. In other words, if I'm interested in dating a woman, it would be beneficial to have that opportunity because it's something that I want. But so REBT would say, and I've done this, if you're hesitant, if you're a little afraid to ask this woman out on a date, go ahead and do it. See what thoughts come up, and you can then have the opportunity to work on these demanding thoughts, okay? And it also says you're just a human being. You're never going to be anything but a human being. So if you have demanding thoughts, it's simply because you're a fallible human being, right? And that's another thing I like about REBT so much, that I get to really accept myself and not need more. I don't need to be more than I already am, because I can't be more than I already am anyway. And so I can just accept myself as somebody who's fallible, who does make mistakes, who wants to try to make less mistakes. But no matter what, I can accept myself, even with aspects of myself that I'm not crazy about. It'd be nice if I was 6'2". I'm not. I'm 5'10". Okay. If I was 6'2", that would have big advantages, literally big advantages. Okay. I'm not crazy about being 65 years old. It'd be nice to be 45. I'm not. But I can still accept myself, even with aspects of myself that I don't like. A lot of times you see people saying, oh, you need to love yourself before you love somebody. You don't need to love yourself in order to be happy. I know this. You don't have to love everything about yourself in order to be happy. What you need to do, and this is what people miss, is accept yourself entirely. Accept yourself even with those aspects of yourself that you don't like. If there are aspects of yourself that you don't like that you can change, work on changing them. But if there's some things like being 65 rather than 45, accept it. I am acceptable even with these characteristics that I would rather not have. Now, I could work on changing my mind. Maybe it's good to be 65. Actually, there is in the United States. I now have Medicare, so that's a benefit. So there are some benefits to being 65 rather than 45. So REBT encourages and really inspires and pushes people to be self-accepting, which is so much easier to do than worrying about self-loving. I don't worry about loving myself. I just accept myself, and then I don't worry about myself, and I'm not thinking about myself. I don't have to think about myself all the time. If I accept myself, that's done. I can get on with doing other things, whatever it is that I want to do. In my case, I like to perform, so I can go and perform and concentrate on the performing and playing the music and having a good time.
Yeah, yeah. So, Mick, I think this is an interesting point. Before I just want to chime in before I move to the next question, and that you talked about the egocentric pursuit, which normally people have when they have this idea of self-esteem or
Yeah,
being a noble person and stuff like that. So, I think you really summarize that idea that REBT has a solution for that. That once you let go of this egocentric pursuit about thinking all the time about rating yourself, kind of, you are free to do more fruitful and productive activities.
right. And also, RABT says there will be a tendency to rate yourself.
Mhm.
There will be a tendency to have demands. There will be a tendency to make yourself depressed. That doesn't mean that you have to be depressed. That doesn't mean there aren't things you can do to avoid it. But when you have this tendency, just accept you're a fallible human being and you have this tendency. Now, the good news is the more you practice it, the less this tendency comes about. You
Yeah,
know,
I
it's
think I
still
think I
there.
have read somewhere that Ellis once said that all human beings are born with a hole in their head. Tough shit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's kind of it, you
yeah,
know. And I remind myself because if you I've practiced RBT a lot, but I remind myself I'm still a fallible human being. And even though I don't have a problem with depression anymore, that doesn't mean I absolutely cannot get depressed.
yeah.
I
So
can get depressed. It's possible for me to get depressed. It's not very likely, but I know what to do to avoid it. But one of the things to do to avoid it is to remember I can get depressed. There is no such thing as a 100% ironclad guarantee against depression. And I don't need a 100% ironclad guarantee against depression. If I get depressed, I know what to do to, I definitely know what to do to keep it from getting bigger, which is to tell myself I can stand getting depressed. It's not that big a deal. And then I know what to do to get rid of the depression, which is to find out the demand and eliminate the demand. Just earlier tonight, I was performing stand up comedy. It didn't go very well. And I was driving home and just saying, well, you know, it's not always going to go well, but I don't have to have it go well. I just don't.
good, very good, very good. So,
Yeah.
Mick, that's where I want to now come to one of the specifics of the issue, and that is when you were severely depressed in the past. I would like to ask you which area of your life, specific area of your life, was contributing to that depression,
Okay.
and with REBT, how did you come out of it?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let me get some water.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
That's
please.
it's right over there. This
Yeah.
will take 30 seconds. Yeah. Well, okay. I would say it's two primary things. One, a career. I'm not
Mhm.
as, and this is something that I deal with every day still. I'm not as successful as I'd like to be. More successful would be playing with musicians that are more renowned and making more money from it. Let's face it, more money means more freedom, and better musicians would mean greater music and more pleasure in playing. So I'm trying to get better all the time and be better as a musician and be better as a stand up comic and actor. And I haven't really come anywhere close to achieving what I'd like to achieve. And so what I do is tell myself, well, okay, so I'm not as successful in my career as I'd like to be. I can keep working towards it. All I can do is keep trying. If it doesn't work out, well, I wouldn't like that. I would be unhappy about that if 15 years from now I'm still not anywhere near where I'd like to be. But I still can accept myself. I can accept my life, even if my career is not as stupendous as I'd like it to be. I know fundamentally all it takes to accept myself is to just accept myself. It's all right, I accept it. All it takes to accept my life is I'm going to accept my life. I just decide to do it. Nobody keeps me from accepting my life. Nobody keeps me from accepting myself, and no lack of achievement keeps me from accepting myself or my life. It's very interesting because I've talked to people who have said, my God, if I'd achieved half the things you have, I'd feel like such a success. I just go, oh, okay, well, that's their take on it, you know? But bottom line is, how much am I enjoying myself doing it, you know? And so that's an aspect that I still deal with every day. I can accept myself no matter what. Albert Ellis has the phrase unconditional self-acceptance, USA, right? And unconditional life acceptance and unconditional other acceptance. And then the other category is with romance. I'm still a single man, and I'd like to. I've had several relationships. It just hasn't been anything that's lasted my whole life, I haven't been with a woman that more than 2 years, because when it hasn't worked out, I don't stick around. And I've had some women who got rid of me. And so I remember that some other person, in this case, a woman, adoring me does not make me accept myself. It just doesn't do it, you know? And if it did, then I would stay with a woman just because she was enthralled with me, but that doesn't make me accept myself at all. And in fact, if I don't accept myself, it doesn't matter how much anybody else thinks I'm fantastic or how much anybody else just flat out accepts me. If I'm not accepting myself, I'm not going to be happy. You know, somebody else's attention on me has no bearing on me accepting myself, and no bearing on me accepting my life either. If you know, most of us enjoy the companionship of other human beings. I'm enjoying talking with you, even though you're halfway across the globe. But it's fun to be with people. But if I don't have that opportunity, I can still accept my life, even if it isn't everything I would like it to be. And so those two aspects, and I don't think I'm unusual here, I think that's quite common. The two things that people tend to make demands about, and the two things that people desire the most, are generally a career and a successful romantic partner.
Yeah.
So I'd say in my case, that's generally it.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
I don't think there's really anything else that I could distress or that I tend to distress myself over.
Okay. Very good, Mick. Now I want to ask you, I think you had a good fortune of meeting Albert Ellis or listening to him in person. So can you tell more about it?
Yeah, I probably saw him talk about 10 times, and I've given him rides to the airport.
Okay. So give me your first introduction. Tell me more in detail.
Well, I saw him live. I think he was coming here. My therapist told me he was coming and giving a lecture. I thought I should go. And so I saw him, probably went to about half a dozen workshops that he gave, and saw him on numerous other occasions. And so it was, he spoke with a lot of profanity. And my therapist told me he didn't begin that way, but he found that if he spoke with profanity, people would remember what he said better. And so he started using profanity. But I saw a lot of people walk out of his lectures within 5 minutes. They wouldn't see. He would offend people, and he didn't care if he offended people. And he would work with people generally it'd be about, I think one time there were like 300 people in the audience. Another time there were about 60, 40 or 80, something like that. So the size of the crowd was never more than about 300 at the most. And he would work with people, ask if anybody had a problem, and have them come on stage and talk with them about it. And every time he pretty much just said the same thing, which is find the demand and get rid of the demand. That was really the whole message.
Mhm.
And he was quite funny,
Mhm.
very, very funny. But I have the privilege of messing up one time when I was supposed to pick Albert Ellis up at the airport. And I said I was going to be wearing a Hawaiian shirt so he could recognize me. And I was late and I forgot to wear the Hawaiian shirt. And so he was very angry at me, and he got in a limousine and took off and wouldn't let me give him a ride. And so I've been doing REBT a long time at this point. I thought, well, if he's truthful in his ideas, and if his ideas are worth anything, then I can accept myself, even if Albert Ellis is mad at me and angry with me. And even if he never forgives me, I can still accept myself. And I'm going to take his theory and his words to heart. And that's what I'm going to do. Well, the next day, he needed to go to the doctor. And he called me up and wanted to know if I could give him a ride to the doctor. And I went to his hotel and I gave him a ride to the doctor. And we talked. And he did not hold a grudge or anything. I made a mistake. I'm sure he would have said he could have probably handled it better, but I don't expect. I also learned that no human being is perfect. And I thought to myself, well, if Albert Ellis is mad at me, he's just a fallible human being. And then sure enough, the next morning, I gave him a ride to the doctor and we talked about REBT and just different other things. I got to ask him a couple of interesting questions. I asked him, do you find that human beings are really crazy and crazy to the point where it even amazes you? And he said, well, I do find them crazy, but I'm used to it. So
Yeah. So great to know that you have many personal interactions with the man, and any unique aspects which you find in his personality, and they were quite impressive. If any other things which you would like to tell.
one thing about him was he really could pay attention well. He could
Mhm.
really zero in and he could really focus very, very acutely on something when you were talking to him. His mind didn't wander at all. He was really with you on the topic you were talking about. I think this might be simply because of his profession. He was so used to listening to people and keying in on things.
Mm.
So he was a very good listener and very good at paying attention, and also very good at not taking things too seriously most of the time. You know, he didn't even take himself that seriously. I remember one time there at one of his lectures, he was asking people if they're come on up to the stage and do something that is a little hard for you to do. And a therapist went on stage and said, it's hard for me just to sit next to you. You're somewhat deified. And just to sit next to you I'm nervous to sit next to you. And Albert Ellis said, oh, really? Just sitting here is hard for you? He said, well, it's getting easier. Oh, how do you feel now? Well, it's feeling okay. Oh, so you're able to get over your anxiety of sitting next to me by coming and sitting next to me. And the person said, yeah, okay, good. Anything else? No. And then they went and sat down.
Interesting.
Yeah. And now another thing I like about REBT is these are ideas that Albert Ellis developed, but I know that he would not want to be worshipped at all. That's just ridiculous. And I think so often in the self-help field, people become these gurus. And he did incredibly impressive things, but he would never claim to be anything but another fallible human being. I remember once with my friend Michael Edelstein, I was saying, I see Albert Ellis being quite rational. Seems to me I'd like to aim for being at least as rational. He said, well, he's a bad person to compare yourself to because it'd be so hard to get to that point. Well, as I've since then told Michael Edelstein, no, I think he's a good person to compare myself to, because if he's really that highly rational, but also I think I've gotten to the point where I may be more rational than Albert Ellis was, because I could see him grow very impatient with people, and he would know that he was getting upset and then, apologize for it. But it's in talking with his widow, Debbie Joffe Ellis, at one point I thought, and one of the ideas of REBT is don't aim for complete rationality. You just want to be largely rational, but don't try to become 100% rational. It's a crazy thing to say, I must be 100% rational. And I was talking with Debbie Joffe Ellis about this, and she said, well, okay, but being mindful as much as you can to get rid of the demands when you come up is being mindful. It's not being neurotic. So you might just see how rational you might be able to be and look on it as mindful. Don't demand to be 100% rational, but maybe you could strive to be more rational than you thought you could be, which is an interesting thought.
Yeah. So don't run behind a utopia, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Great. So, Mick, a lot of insights. I think they will definitely help our viewers. So, before we sign off, any suggestion or any tips for people who have just started practicing REBT or who intend to start practicing REBT?
Yeah, right. Well, it takes a little while to get the hang of it. I would say bouncing your ideas off of somebody else. A therapist is going to cost money. Generally, you'll see them once a week. But if you can find some friends that practice REBT, because often our friends will be able to recognize the demand we're making on ourselves when it's hard for us to recognize it. And it's been very helpful for me. I have a few other friends that practice REBT. And if I'm having a little bit of trouble identifying a demand, I'll call them up and they'll help me see what it is. But the thing is, when we're in the habit of putting ourselves down, of demanding ourselves to achieve something or to be loved by somebody, or if we're depressed, we're in the habit of making demands, or if we're anxious, we're in the habit of making demands. And it can take some time to reverse those habits. And I would say expect that you can have alleviation and relief from the anxiety or the depression or the anger or rage, but don't expect that it's going to be something you achieve and then it's all over with. It's a daily practice. And if you find that your anxiety is alleviating and then it comes back, it doesn't mean that REBT isn't working. It's just that you have habits of thinking in demanding ways, and you want to cultivate and grow in the habits of recognizing the demands and reducing the demands to just really eliminating them to where it's just desires. So when you're beginning with this, I've seen some people do it for a little bit and then they get depressed again. They conclude REBT doesn't work. No, it does, because it's simply the dynamics of how the human mind works. How we think determines how we feel. If we're thinking in demanding ways, we're going to have anxiety, depression, or anger. And so it takes practice and to remember that you're a fallible human being, and it isn't going to just click and that's going to be the end of it. It takes daily practice. Then also, it doesn't have to take that much daily practice. 5 to 10 minutes starting out. And
in Ellis's words, work and practice.
What's that?
In Ellis' words, it is work and practice.
Yeah. In what with work and practice?
Albert Ellis's words.
Yeah. Work and practice. Yeah. Right. And let me just say one other thing. I found this idea of I can't stand it. If I'm in a situation and I think I can't stand it, I used to look upon that as, okay, wait, I can stand it, and look upon, I'm gonna strive to stand this. And it was a lot of work, but okay, I can stand this situation that I don't like. I can do the work to stand this. But then I started looking on it another way, which made it much easier, which is to be semantically precise about what does I can't stand it mean. And that means that I can't function, I can't live my life, I will explode, I will deteriorate, I will die if this situation doesn't change, none of which is true. None of which is true. So the idea that I can't stand it is not anything I have to do anything about. I'm going to stand it. What does standing it mean? That I'm going to still exist? I will exist even if I feel lousy in this situation. I just won't be standing it and feeling well, but I'll be standing it. I won't be enjoying myself while I'm standing it, but I realized I don't have to do anything to stand a situation.
Yeah.
What I can do is do things so that I'll feel better while this situation is in my life. But there's nothing I have to do to stand a situation. If we're telling ourselves, I can't stand it, that is something that doesn't even exist. And this is what's so funny, because the type of meditation I had a phrase for a life of illusion, which was called Maya. I think that's Hindu or something for illusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it offered nothing for a real solution here. But this is a complete illusion. I can't stand a situation. It doesn't exist. I'm going to stand it. How do I want to stand it? Well, I want to stand it and feel okay. All right, so I need to get rid of my demand. But even if I don't get rid of my demand, I'm going to be standing it. So that completely takes away the thought I can't stand something without me even having to do anything to stand it.
Very good, very good. Yeah. So, Mick, thank you on the concluding part. If you can end the session with Saint Albert voice.
So one more time. Well, I wanted to commend you, Niraj, for having patience with me, because I think this is our fourth attempt to get together. And the other three times, I don't think you've told anybody this, but the other three times I spaced out 3 times in a row, not once, not twice, 3 times. And each time you were willing to, as far as I could tell, accept me as a fallible human being. So it ended up working out, which is a perfect REBT exercise. So to finish off with an imitation by Albert Ellis, good luck to you.
Thank you, Mick.
Right.
So I think your inputs will definitely help the viewers. Do comment, like this episode, and share your views. I am sharing the book written by Mick Berry in the comment below. And thank you very much.